So last year, I had this friend who was suffering from this very mysterious sickness. He was blacking out a lot. He was having a lot of fatigue, a lot of anxiety too. And so he went to one doctor, and the one doctor told him he was just stressed, told him to go home and take some anti anxiety meds. But he didn't buy that it was just stress. So he went to a second doctor to get a second opinion. And the second doctor told him that it wasn't stress, but a thyroid issue. He was told to get a completely different plan. So then he decided to go to a third doctor because he thought, okay, this third doctor can be a good tiebreaker for the first two. But then the third doctor, instead of adding more clarity, actually made things more confusing because the third doctor said the first two doctors didn't know what they were talking about. They were idiots because the issue was a completely different issue. And so he was basically prescribed three very different diagnoses and three very different treatment plans. And he was like, WTF? But he said, okay, no worries, right? So all these three doctors had all three different treatment plans. So he's like, okay, let me go forward on all three. Let me shotgun this shit because like this problem was so painful to him. He just wanted to shotgun it. If his thinking was if it did everything, then something must work. I don't really care what works. Let me just do all the thing. Then 2 weeks later, he realized he wasn't feeling better. In fact, he was feeling even worse. So after spending all this money, after spending all this time, he was not only no closer to getting a treatment, but he was also no closer to understanding what he was even having, to diagnosing the issue. And this guy was a very successful guy. So when we met a few weeks later, he's like, Jeff, I've never felt this powerless or this lost in my life, to be honest. With anything in my life, like I've always found a way, or if I didn't find a way, I always found someone who found a way. But I literally now have no idea what to do, what to ask, because even the best so called experts, doctors, are not even able to diagnose me right now. I feel like there's no way out right now. That he told me these words, right? He said the words drowning, he said the words hopeless, and he said the words free falling. And when I heard those three words, I was like, that was exactly how I felt when I was trying to save my relationship. But I bet that's also how a lot of my clients feel when they come to me trying to save their marriage, when they're on the brink of divorce, separation, etc. You see 1,000 voices, you see books, you see YouTube, the red pill forums, coaches, family, friends, all telling you 1,000 different pieces of advice, all pulling you in a very different direction, all contradicting each other sometimes. And the harder you work at it, it seems like, the worse things get. And when nothing works, is that helpless feeling of having nothing to grab onto. It's like free falling, but you have no branches to grab onto. That's really the worst feeling, the most powerless feeling. And if you can relate to this, then in this video, I want to show you how simple the whole journey of reconciliation can be and should be. And I'm going to show you why we get so many clients who have gone to so many other coaches, therapists before, and we are really the last doctor they ever need to see. And what I've learned after observing 6,000 plus clients here is that success, so whether you can reconcile or not, really boils down to one key factor. Like, seriously, you can really forget about every single piece of advice you have gotten about relationships and just pull this lever well. Learn to pull this lever well, and everything falls into place. It's like hitting the jackpot every single time whenever you pull this one lever. And I hope, guys, this is really going to blow your mind. And this stuff is not easy stuff. It's going to be taking some time for you to master this stuff. But as they say, right? If you are willing to do what's hard, your life will be easy. But if you're only willing to do what's easy, then life will be hard. Now, we all know the words post traumatic stress disorder, right? But that's not the lever that we're talking about. The lever that we're talking about, the one question, the one skill is really, does your internal self, so your emotional state, yourself, and also have you created a culture that can allow it to go through what we call post traumatic growth? So we all have heard post traumatic stress, but can you go through post traumatic growth? So in our program, we just shortened it to PTSG. So instead of post traumatic stress disorder, we're saying post traumatic stress growth. So if you chart out what relationships look like for most people, it's really like this orange line here, where you start at the top at the beginning, where you have this honeymoon period where everything is very blissful, you're giddy about each other, all the conversations are great, you guys are not fighting, no baggage, whatever it is. And then from there, if you talk to most people, I think their idea of a marriage is that things go downhill from there. Maybe boom, one day you get family issues and you have annoying relatives that make things awkward. Then maybe a year later, 2 years later, boom, right? You have more fights, you have more arguments, you hold more resentments until the day you die. If you look at it closely, you'll see that each trauma just makes the relationship worse and worse and worse and worse. So every time the stressors come, your relationship goes through what we call post traumatic stress disorder. It just gets worse with more trauma, with more stress, with more time. You guys have sex less. You guys fight more. You guys hold more resentments. You guys love each other less, less gifts, less nice words. And the whole relationship now just becomes this whole losing battle of trying to keep shit together. So, no fucking wonder, right? People, when you talk to a lot of people today, they feel very jaded about a relationship, about marriage. And whenever people are on the brink of divorce or separation, the number one thing people seem to ask is the question, is it even worth it? Do I even see the point of marriage anymore? Do I even want my partner anymore? And I used to think that marriage was like that too. But I can honestly say right now, after, you know, almost 9 years now of doing this business, I don't think the same way anymore. And here's what changed it for me. So, for a lot of you who have known me for a while, who have followed me for a while, you'll know that I grew up in a pretty traumatic childhood. Both physical abuse, emotional abuse was a very big part of my childhood. And naturally, I tended to make friends with people who actually also went through very traumatic childhoods as well. I guess like attracts like. But I noticed something very interesting is that of all the people that I've come into contact with who have experienced abusive childhood, etc., some people they crumble because of it, while another group actually become the best, become better, became the best version of themselves because of the same trauma. And not only did I see this in people, my friends who are going through trauma in their childhood, but I also see this in a lot of couples, right? You see some couples, for example, going through very tough trauma. One of my employees, for example, who was a client of mine back then, Jason, actually had a daughter that passed away, right? So how does some couples, why do some couples die because of trauma, die because of misunderstandings, die because of traumatic events? And why do some couples actually grow stronger because of traumatic events? So again, the same traumatic event, but one stresses, one grows. What's the key difference here? So it really goes back into, do we go through post-traumatic stress or do we go through post-traumatic growth? And I know a lot of us know what post-traumatic stress is, but we haven't really talked about what post-traumatic growth is. To understand this, right? Imagine there's a monster in Greek mythology called Hydra. And Hydra is a creature that you cut off one of its heads and it grows two. You cut off the two heads, it grows four. So it's a creature that gets better whenever it gets trauma, whenever it gets stress. Why can't we apply this to marriage? The thing with a lot of people is that the reason why they cannot reconcile is because they cannot break this cycle of having relationship stressors coming, that stressors create trauma. The trauma, because you have PTSD from it, you cannot break through that trauma. And so that creates more stress. And that stress leads to more trauma. The trauma leads to more stress, and so on and so on. And they cannot break the cycle. And this factor is also the number one factor that prevents people from having happy marriages, even if they choose someone else. So in my program or with my audience, the questions that I get the most are questions like, well, how do I know when I'm ready to find a new partner? How do I know when I should move on from my partner, from my current partner, to find a new person? How do I know if I've mastered the program or not? How do I know if I need to do the program or not? And the one question I really ask them is, okay, so imagine right now, right? Some trauma happens. Are you able to grow, to post traumatically grow from that trauma internally? But also, are you able to post traumatically grow from in your relationship from trauma? So when you get tough truths, when you get resistances, when you get difficult moments, does your self get stronger and does your relationship get stronger or does it get weaker? I was talking to someone one time and basically his basic issue was he was not able to reconcile because he was not able to break through and turn that trauma into a growth opportunity for the relationship and for himself. And he was using that as a excuse or as a reason to find a new partner, basically. And I told him about what philosophers call the sour grapes problem. So here's a guy, right? He doesn't know how to climb a tree. So instead of learning to climb a tree, he convinces himself that the grapes that are out of his reach, high up in the trees, are sour. So because it's sour, he says it's not worth learning to climb. So I'm just gonna be happy, be content with just the grapes underneath here, and not even learn to climb to really see if the grapes up there are actually worth learning to climb for. And this is very similar to what the client was facing here because Whether he chooses a new partner or not is not really the main question. The main question is, does he know how to climb? Does he know how to post-traumatically grow? Because if he doesn't know how to post-traumatically grow, it doesn't really matter if he chooses a new partner or old partner. Either way, any relationship you have is going to keep dying from trauma. But if you learn how to post-traumatically grow, then it doesn't really matter also whether you choose to stay with your current partner or find a new partner, because no matter what, you can make sure that everything grows. And so I hope you see here how this simple question is really behind the crux of every single answer you can potentially think of. I know all these questions people have of like, is it worth it to try? Is it, should I do this? Should I do that? It really doesn't matter. The main question you got to ask yourself is, are you able, do you have the skills to post traumatically grow in yourself and also in your relationship? Or currently, does trauma and stresses, is it more of a threat to you than it is an opportunity? Now, I want you to really pause and think about what a marriage like this would feel like. To know that not only can nothing kill your marriage, can nothing kill you, but whenever other things, trauma, stresses come, it can only make you stronger. There's kind of a funny thing there where think about what a marriage and what a life would look like whenever you have some external pressures, it just makes you better. Whenever you have fights, it just makes you better. Whenever you hear tough truth, it just makes you better. In everything, every trauma makes you better. So if it's no trauma, great. If it's trauma, even fucking better. Think about how inspiring that would be to know that what is happening today is the lowest, and everything, if you learn how to go through post traumatic growth, everything just goes better from there. You cannot go down. It's impossible to go down. Right? Everything just goes better from there. Think about how inspiring it would be for you to want to work on the relationship now, knowing that the future is going to be brighter, can be brighter than what you can even see or imagine right now. So contrast this to how most relationships feel like, which is like this fight to just keep things together for as long as you can. This game of just holding shit together for as long as you can, and hopefully you'll be saved by the bell in the future. And I think that is such an uninspiring model for a relationship. And I think the post-traumatic growth method is a much more inspiring model for a relationship. So let's play that game then. And so the reason why I created my program, and the reason why I created my program the way it is, everything in my program is designed to help the person in the program go through post-traumatic growth. You know, every one of my clients who are in the program are going through very traumatic events. But the first thing they learn and the best thing they learn is to take these traumatic events and actually make it a good thing, make them grow from that. And there's really three things you need to focus on to become more like Hydra. And so if you ask my clients, I tell them focus on the three things and three things only. So number one, does your process increase your capacity for trauma? And it's a very simple concept. I think we've all heard the concept of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So objective number one is actually very simple. Objective number one is, if we grow most from the right side of this golden zone, how can we extend this line in which we call it the death zone? How can we extend this line as right as much as possible? So how do you know if your limits are very short right now? Well, if tiny issues in your relationship right now is causing big fights, or people who are easily overwhelmed, easily angry, easily triggered, if traumas right now when you're going through divorce or separation, when this difficult conversations is creating a lot of intense emotions within you, that's when you know your limits are actually very low and you need to start to increase that limit. So as you move this line, this death zone line right, that slope will get a lot steeper. The more you move it left, the slope will get less steep, to the point where if if you go negative, it will actually go downhill. Now, I want you to beware of some approaches, though. There's some better or worse approaches when it comes to extending this line. And for a lot of my clients, who will come from other programs, they really realize the weakness of this approach because, when you talk about stoicism, holding your frame, or relationship techniques like compromises or looking at boundaries, for example, it's almost like building pressure up in a balloon. So it's assuming almost that you're this finite entity that can only take so much. So yes, you can hold your frame, you can practice stoicism, and you can hold more stuff. Trauma happens, hold it. Trauma happens, hold it. Trauma happens, hold it. But eventually, as you keep holding more things, that balloon, as it gets bigger, right, that balloon is going to get a lot more fragile, because even a tiny nudge or a tiny like prick is going to make it explode. Now, it's almost like having a basketball that's so pumped up that like anything you do to it will just boom explode, right? And so if you think about it that way, these approaches of stoicism and holding your frame, it looks intellectually like it would move it right, but actually the more shit you take is going to move it further left. with more trauma, it's going to move further left. So be careful of that approach, and why in our program we teach people, and all our approaches are thriving in nature. So we don't just tell people to suck things up, right? That's not what the bulletproof vest is. When instead we tell people, shift your attention, shift it from negative into positive. Now, I'm not saying to you to for you to create trauma, right? To create resistance, but if you are in a divorce state or almost divorce state, you're gonna have a lot of trauma come to you and stress come to you from life and resistance come to you from life. Use those, but change the way we look at them, change the way we interpret them. And we also don't tell people to turn a negative into a neutral with the frameworks. We actually tell people a negative into a positive. So, like in many previous videos, for example, we tell you whenever your partner tells you she wants divorce, for example, right, that's actually a perfect opportunity for you to shift the conversation towards the concept of not you versus her, but you and her versus the problem of her unhappiness and a pursuit for happiness here, right? So for our model here, the more trauma you place into the relationship, the further right this line goes, not left, right. This line goes, the death line goes, right? Because you want more and more and more of it. You see it more and more as an opportunity, as a good thing. And number two, the question is, how is your growth and disorder ratio? So every system or every organism is made up of smaller parts, right? So if you look at the body here, if you zoom in, right, you'll see that we're made up of cells. And those cells are made up of atoms, right? They're called fractals in life. So look it up, the word fractals, right? So if you look at an organism or a system, the overall capacity for a system or organism is really dependent on the ratio of growth or stress of these fractals. And now in our relationship, every moment, every conversation, every interaction we have with our partner is a part of these fractals that make up the overall health of the relationship. In our personal health, in our personal mental health, every thought, every feeling, every interpretation makes up these fractals that makes up our overall system of how we feel, of our self-concept. So for both our relationship and for both ourselves here, if we are able to increase the growth to disorder ratio, then our relationship and ourselves will net go through post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. And vice versa, right? If we are more stressed, not enough growth, then we'll net go down over time. The tricky part about this, though, there's three caveats to this, is that number one, right, many of our fractals when it comes to internal self, but also in the relationship, is unseen. So unlike in a restaurant business, you can see when a restaurant fails or succeeds, right? In ourselves, it's hidden beneath. There's no mirror. There's no like diagnosing equipment that we can use to actually read what are the fractals looking like in our internal self, but also in the relationship, right? So a lot of times we're doing something wrong without even knowing it. So for example, for our human bodies, right? So I want you to imagine here, your human body has so many processes in there that are so automated, right? Even mitochondrial function, right? Cell recovery, synapses firing here and there, right? There's so many processes that our body has that we're not aware of. Now, say, right, one day everything now becomes manual. Now you have to control every single thing about your body to keep it alive. So, sure, right, you can focus on a few key things you can do to keep your body alive. Let's say you focus on 3, 4, 5 things. But when you focus on the 3, 4, 5 things, what about the multiple thousands of things that you're not focusing on, right? And this is really the massive program with a lot of programs, is that they will teach you how to write letters. They'll teach you how to handle yourself in 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5 conversations sometimes. But what about the 1,000, the 2,000, the 10,000 conversations that are not happening, that you're not touching, that still has a very bad growth to disorder ratio? And if you are in a position where you are, in a close to divorce, you have to admit that your growth to disorder ratio hasn't been good, right? So if let's say there's like a 10,000 units that you have to focus on, and you're focusing on just like the optimizing 5 units and ignoring the other 9,995 units, you're not going to be putting much of a dent into your relationship in the long term. And it's also why our program has been a lot more successful. So basically, we boil it down to 14 mind viruses that rule all our emotions. You master these 14 mind viruses, you will rule over your emotion. We have the 7 frameworks to rule all conversations. And we tell people to master these things until they can't get it wrong. So the reason why our program has been more successful is that we narrowed it down to, hey, there's 14 mind viruses. If you fix these 14 mind viruses, you will master your emotions. You will master your internal self. We have 7 frameworks. If you master the 7 frameworks, you will master an infinite conversations. So our approach here is designed to maximize our growth and minimize disorder ratio. But we don't do that by asking you to do all these millions of things. We ask you to do it by mastering just a few things. You master these few things, you will take control and master over all the different fractals in your life. Number 3 is what we call prevent cancer cells or the turkey problem. So again, in our example there, our human body, for example, can grow from stresses, but if you give in too much stress, the whole species goes extinct and it can't grow from it, right? And there are 2 types of extinction events that really happen. So number 1 is what we call the spiral. So you have to understand that our bad thoughts here have a capacity to be very self-perpetual. So I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this, but like you're sitting on a couch, nothing new is really happening. Maybe you're even watching a comedy show, but here your mind is what we call ruminating, right? It's thinking about a bad thought that leads to another bad thought that leads to another bad thought, another bad thought, another bad thought. And before you know it, 5 minutes later, you're sitting on the couch watching some comedy show and you're getting fucking pissed. You're getting fucking angry at something. Or maybe in your relationship, right? They have a small conversation that triggers you because it pulls some strings and buttons that makes you triggered. And that small conversation, small issue turns into a massive fucking fight like 2 hours later. And then you're like, 2 hours later, you're like, how the fuck did we get here? How do we get to from Timmy, needing a new diaper to like suddenly I want a divorce? How does that happen? And these are moments when we call cancer cells or cancer fractals, right? And the thing with these cancer cells is that your growth and disorder ratio can be very healthy, but it often takes just one cancer cell to kill the whole organism. Your body, 99.9% of your cells can be healthy in your body, but it just takes a few cancer cells to spread and just kill your whole body the same way. Which is why in our program we call bad thoughts and bad paradigms really mind viruses, because they have the same mechanism as a physical virus. But the only big difference, and the one that makes mental viruses a lot more dangerous, is that it's unseen, it's undiagnosable. So it has the ability to just free reign and multiply in silence for a long time without being touched, without showing any symptoms, without being seen. So the first thing is we got to be careful of these cancer cells popping up. And the second type is what philosophers call the turkey problem. So you have this turkey, right? The Americans eat turkey during Thanksgiving every fucking year. Like we buy so much turkey on Thanksgiving. And so if you're a turkey though, for 9 months out of the year, you're being fed, you're being fattened by your farmers, right? And so you learn to love this farmer. You're like, wow, life is really good, right? But when it comes to around October, perhaps, or even like September, that's the slaughter time for the turkeys. And so for the turkeys, right, when they're about to get slaughtered, if they had consciousness, they would think like, bro, what the hell happened? I thought we were friends. I thought everything was great, right? And then, right, off with their heads kind of thing. And this is akin to a lot of men that I see sometimes who are very blindsided by the divorce, right? Their partner says, I want a divorce. And they're like, what happened? I thought everything was great. I thought, wow, where did this come from? I thought we were friends. And that's really why in our program, the role of emotional safety is so key, right? Is that when you have emotional safety, you create this culture environment where we never become the turkey problem. And the turkey problem is really the problem of being so unaware of what is happening in the relationship, in your system, that your own slaughter is a blind side. But if you had emotional safety and you allow your partner to gently give you the information in streams, you're never going to be caught oblivious. Things never really explode. The bomb never really drops because the bomb never really has a chance to form. And it's also the role of key principles we have, like SOC, seat of consciousness, right? When we have SOC, we prevent ourselves from spiraling. It's why we have an antithetical mind, and so on and so on. Like all our processes are designed to prevent these 2 types of extinction events. And to zoom out even further, our program, if you look at the structure of our program, everything is designed to optimize these 3 things. And when you optimize these 3 things, you can now pull the lever of post-traumatic growth very, very effectively. And when you can turn every trauma to post-traumatic growth, reconciliation becomes easy, where no stress equals good, but the more stress you get equals better And so this is why we often say in our program too that no situation is unique. Because if you tell me right now, Jeff, you've never had a case like as bad as mine, my thinking is, well, if your case is so bad, then that should be even better. That should be even more opportunities, right? And it's also what you need to grow beyond reconciliation too. So again, in order to have no relapses, but also a point where reconciliation or the honeymoon phase is actually the worst phase. Things just get better from there. And just to give you a few examples of how this can be applied, we had a client, right, who, in our program, people spar a lot and they practice the new way of talking in the program. And sometimes part of that is giving each other very intense resistances and intense tough truths. So this client was sparring with another member, and this other person on the camera was cussing at him, all right? Trying to teach him, like, okay, how do you handle tough resistance, tough anger, whatever it is? Let's role play through that. And his wife overheard some of the cussing. And his wife was like, I don't think this is a good program for you, my guy. And he came to me very panicked, right? He's like, what do I do, Jeff? I'm like, okay, if we talk about post traumatic growth, that was a trauma. Your partner misunderstanding your program is a trauma. Do you take that and do you stress from it? Or do you take that and do you grow from it? Because this could be a very good opportunity for you to maybe talk about the program, discuss the program, share about the program, and change some of the misunderstandings. In fact, right, you panicking right now whenever there's a misunderstanding is probably why your relationship has been going through PTSD for so long, right? Traumatic stress for so long. Because every time, like for you right now, a stressful moment, a trauma, a tough truth is a threat, not an opportunity. In fact, I would go so far as to say not only are traumas major opportunities for you to grow, but growth often cannot happen without these traumas. It's not until sometimes troubles happen and issues happen that we finally say to ourselves, okay, fine, let's talk about it. Let's have a discussion. Let's have a conversation about it. I've given you some examples earlier about how some clients, they take the partner saying, I want divorce, I want to separate, I want an open relationship as actually an opportunity to have to take the conversation to very beautiful places of compassion, of understanding, of trust, of safety. And these opportunities to have this conversation sometimes will never come if your partner had never said, I want a divorce, I want to separate. So this is what I mean when I say, these traumas not only are major opportunities for you to grow, but just like the anti-fragile box, sometimes you want traumas to come because without these traumas, you cannot actually showcase your growth or have those opportunities. And so again, it goes back to the main question, right? Do you know how to post traumatically grow, or do you crumble with stress? If you learn to post traumatically grow, no matter what happens, reconciliation is very simple. Maintaining and growing the relationship is going to be very simple as well. But without that, no matter what you do, it's going to be very hard. So, like I always say, if you know the right methodology, the right process, you can thrive under any structure. If you don't know the right process, it doesn't matter what structure you choose, you will struggle no matter what. So, if you want to learn how to go through PTSG, post traumatic growth, not only in yourself, but also in your relationship, then join me in my masterclass on the 5 proven steps to rebuilding your relationship from the ground up. At the end of the masterclass, if you want to apply for the program, I will give you instructions to do so. So hopefully that was helpful, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.